Mr. Coffey, thank you very much for taking the time to join us here. Obviously, we're heading into the UNGA week, and I wanted to ask you whether you think that the UN is really shaping up international politics.
Actually, I'm not too optimistic about the UN's role in the big international issues of the day. I think historically this has also been the case, and it's primarily because states are driven by national interests, and there is a lack of consensus on many of the big contentious issues around the world. If we want a very recent reminder of this, we only have to look at a year ago during the Second Karabakh War, where after almost 30 years of a failed UN process, a failed OSCE process, Azerbaijan essentially had to implement those 4 UN resolutions that were passed in the 1990s by itself. There was a complete reluctance or unwillingness by the UN to address that particular issue. So that's just one example, and there are many out there.
We see the United Nations trying to implement itself as a force in different conflict zones, whether it be Syria or, like you said, Azerbaijan and between Azerbaijan and Armenia, and different areas like Israel and Palestine. And the United Nations is heavily criticized for its for not being quite active, or like for not being a strong enough force to solve those issues. Where do you think lies the problem?
Well, the problem is, I would say, in the structure of the United Nations, and I'm not suggesting that there's a better option out there. Perhaps the system itself is just fundamentally flawed in this day and age. But when you have 5 UN Security Council, permanent UN Security Council members that maintain a veto power, and there are times when these 5 do not get along, some of them see the world one way, the others see the world a different way, you're bound to get gridlock. And again, I'm not necessarily saying that the UN security, the permanent members should give up their veto. I think there's no way they would do this, but I think we have to at least acknowledge that this is a fundamental part of the problem that the UN faces.
We're going to see more than 150 countries, heads of state and government, deliver their speech at the UNGA. But as we all know, it always comes down to those 5 countries at the UN Security Council that call the shots. Do you really think that their messages are going to fall on deaf ears, or is there a point in these leaders going all the way to New York and deliver their messages?
Well, I think there is a point for this. If for anything else, it allows these heads of state or heads of government of perhaps medium or smaller countries to get their voices heard. People do hear their voices at this UN General Assembly. Also, for a domestic audience, it plays well back at home. So for a head of state or a head of government to speak to an international audience. And there have been cases in the past where different heads of state or government have been able to really put a spotlight on a particular issue. But I would say in general terms, it doesn't alter the course of the United Nations or change much fundamentally, but it does offer an opportunity to make sure one's voice and opinions are heard by the international community.
Obviously, this UNGA is coming right off the back of the debacle, let's say, from the American perspective in Afghanistan. How do you think the Afghanistan situation is going to play out at the UNGA?
Well, that remains to be seen. I mean, right now, the permanent representative from Afghanistan to the United Nations is a holdover from the Ghani administration. In order for the Taliban to send their representative to the United Nations, the UN would have to recognize the credentials of this diplomat, and there's no indication that this will happen. So I suspect that there'll be some sort of compromise behind the scenes brokered by the permanent members of the UN Security Council, kind of like what we're seeing with Myanmar or Burma, where the military junta government is not going to get the podium, but the previous, the holdover permanent representative from Burma isn't going to speak either. No one's essentially going to speak. I suspect we'll see some sort of deal like that. But when you have at least 13 members of the new so-called caretaker government of the Taliban under UN sanctions already, it doesn't make sense to me, or I cannot see how the UN could actually someday recognize the Taliban as the legitimate government of Afghanistan.
Do you think some countries are going to publicly, at the level of the UNGA, call on the United States to do more? or more of a specific action when it comes to Afghanistan? And what countries do you think those could be?
Well, if they do, it'll be falling on deaf ears. The Biden administration has shown that it has no appetite or desire to do anything in Afghanistan. We saw with the, as you described, a debacle, I would call a fiasco, or even a national disgrace. We saw what happened recently because the Biden administration did not want to even maintain the small U.S. troop presence in the country. And right now, the Biden administration wants to put Afghanistan in the rearview mirror. If the faster they can do that from their point of view, the better. They want the American public and the international community to move on from this issue. Obviously, this is not happening. Every single day, the story sticks around and, in fact, sometimes even grows. But I do not think that the United States, regardless of what might be called for at the UN, will step up to the plate and do more in Afghanistan.
The whole world, let's say, if I'm not being mistaken, the whole world has seen how the situation in Afghanistan played out and pointed fingers at the Biden administration for their massive failure when it comes to intelligence or taking the right action at the right time. So do you really think that the Biden administration is going to be going at the UNGA this year round with a little bit of their reputation shrunk?
Of course, not just the Biden administration's reputation shrunk, but America's image and prestige in the world has been diminished because of the actions taken by the Biden administration as it pertains to Afghanistan. Because of the situation, the Taliban actually now control more of Afghanistan today than it did 20 years ago during the original 9/11 attacks in 2001. This action by the Biden administration has emboldened America's adversaries and competitors around the world. It's made many of our partners and allies question American resolve, and it's provided a boost to extremist movements all around the world.
We know that Turkey is a NATO ally to the United States that's been on the ground in Afghanistan for nearly 2 decades. What do you think in the near future with the Taliban administration, let's say, in Afghanistan? And we also know that Turkey has been very much interested in the functioning of the Kabul airport. So how do you think Turkey and the United States could work together perhaps to see what's going to happen on the ground in Afghanistan in the near future?
Well, I think if the past 5 or 6 years have shown us anything, it is that at least in Central Asia, the Caucasus, and in Afghanistan, the Turkic influence is on the rise. Turkey is becoming a more influential player in this region. So it benefits the United States very much that we have Turkey as our ally, that Turkey is in NATO, even though we have right now a difficult relationship. I, for one, am not ready to throw away 7 decades of good relations with Turkey for 7 or so challenging years. And I think there's more that unites us than that divides us. But when it comes to Afghanistan, I think there is scope for Turkey to play a minimal role for the United States in Afghanistan to help maybe promote or communicate U.S. interests towards the Taliban. If, let's say, there's a hostage situation or there needs to be distribution of humanitarian aid, Turkey might be able to coordinate with the Taliban, because I think Turkey in Afghanistan is seen as an honest broker by all sides. Whether you support the Taliban, you support the resistance movement, or you're someone in between who really just wants to get on with life, I think Turkey and the Turkish flag symbolizes impartiality. So Turkey is seen as an honest broker, and that could benefit the United States and also benefit the people of Afghanistan. But my one concern would be is if the Taliban itself isn't united, and we're already seeing signs that they're not united, then there may not be an interlocutor for Turkey to deal with in Afghanistan for the foreseeable future.
Mr. Coffey, thank you very much for the conversation.
Thank you.